My guest today is Kírs J. Kírs is an experienced coordinator at a luxury spa and hotel in Vancouver, British Columbia. Using their expertise and lived experience as a transgender and non-binary individual, they engage industry professionals in conversations regarding gender inclusivity with a focus in hospitality. After recording episode 43 with Daniel Poulin on diversity and inclusion, we got to talking about what D&I efforts were looking like on the ground within hotels, not just at a corporate level. He introduced me to Kírs, who's been heavily involved on the D&I committee at their hotel, and our initial conversations about doing a follow-up episode led to a fantastic show about what it's like for employees tasked with delivering service day to day, how company efforts affect their ability to do their jobs, having a sense of pride and belonging to one's own workplace, and the actions that companies should be taking right now if they haven't made any movement yet. We're continuing the discussion about diversity and inclusion on this episode. As hotels start to rehire after the pandemic, there's no better time to be talking about how we want things to look going forward. So let's get to it. This is episode 51 of the Proven Principles podcast, Kírs J on diversity and inclusivity in the hospitality industry, volume 2. Enjoy. Kírs, thank you for being on the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You bet. This is the second, and I have to, full disclosure, this is a continuation of a discussion that I was having with Daniel Poulin, and he actually introduced you and I together to kind of continue the conversation that we both started about his larger efforts at Accor. But because of your efforts at your individual hotel, I love the idea of taking this big topic at a high level, corporate level, and funneling it right down into what's going on the ground, so to speak. So thanks for being here to talk about this today.
Oh, yeah, no, thank you. I know we'll probably talk about this some as well, but I met Daniel last year when he invited me onto the Accor North and Central America D&I committee. Mm-hmm. And it was great to really get to know Daniel and be a part of that committee. And I am still on that committee, doing lots of great stuff in our community.
So why don't you give everyone a quick rundown of yourself? What's your story? What are you up to? Who do you work for?
My story.
Let's.
Yeah, well, for myself, I grew up on the East Coast of Canada in Prince Edward Island, really small province. And growing up, I faced a lot of challenges being a genderqueer child, and basically led me to finding a lot more about myself and wanting to really educate others. And I think being a part of such a great community like hospitality, there are so many different walks of life that enter those hotel doors. Basically I moved to Banff, Alberta, straight from Prince Edward Island, went from one small place to another small place. And started working for Fairmont there at the Fairmont Banff Springs, and worked there for 4 years, moved around front office and into the spa, and then made my leap over to Vancouver, where I am today.
Okay. And you're still working for Fairmont in Vancouver?
I am. Yeah.
Okay.
Almost 8 years with the company.
That's incredible. And so what are you doing with Fairmont now?
So at Fairmont right now, I'm working at a spa, and it's almost 5-star rated spa.
So close. Like those extra points are so hard to get.
I know. And it's a beautiful location. We're right on the water, and it's a really great place to work every day.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's a beautiful spot. There's no doubt. So what's your involvement with the D&I committee, if it's even called that, at the hotel? How did that all come to be, and how did your involvement come to be?
Well, it really started when I did start with the Fairmont 8 years ago. I was still struggling with my own identity. And basically, I came out to my friends and family, and I've been really starting my journey with coming out on all aspects of my life. And I think Fairmont was something hospitality was something that I really struggled with in my own job. You come into work every day and you wear the same uniform that everyone else wears, which for being like a male in the spa industry, you don't really have a uniform.
It's kind of like, it's like scrubs almost, right? Or
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, basically 2 years ago, I came out to my hotel as trans. I'm trans and non-binary. So I use they, them pronouns, and I don't identify as either male or female. If you asked me when I was 7 years old, I would probably say I am the girliest girl you ever met. But for right now, I identify as non-binary. And basically, after coming out in my hotel, it was an emotional time. And I basically worked with our human resources team and my own management team and leaders to kind of change some of our standard operating procedures and really work on the back end to get myself some comfortable accommodations, but for any future employees that come into the hotel.
Take me back to the day when you woke up, when you were walking into work at the hotel in Vancouver, when you figured this is the day where I'm going to go have this conversation with human resources.
I feel like, and like to put it into some perspective, myself and one other person in the North and Central America region are genderqueer or trans that the company knows of. But for myself, I had been working there for 6 years and they didn't really know this. So I feel like I did not wake up with that intention at all. It was not on my mind. But working in hospitality, I know that a lot of the listeners too, if they work in hospitality or the service industry, they really know that it can sometimes be a heated environment. And
Yep.
it was just one of these things where we had monthly one-on-ones, and I think it was just one of those days when someone just kind of looks at you differently, and you just like kind of get a little heated, and then you go into this meeting, you're just like, oh my gosh, what I'm going to talk about, and then it just all came out. And I think one of the biggest struggles was just living that kind of dual life where I couldn't be myself at work, and I couldn't really, bridge that gap.
What was the company's stance or perspective or messaging around what we're talking about before you came out to them?
I don't really think that there was anything specific to do with the trans identity or inclusivity, really. But I think that hospitality is such a welcoming environment that I probably could have, if I were to relive my time at Fairmont, come out a lot sooner. But really it was just maybe a struggle that I had internally. But
rather than getting pushed to it.
Right, exactly. And I think that's something that I've really tried to change in my involvement with the D&I committee, is to really create a safe space where people can be a little bit more forthcoming. And that goes from everything from our documents, which is a huge hurdle for people, to just physically entering spaces. Because from a colleague perspective, you really are just given two options. You're given two uniforms to choose from, and whatever it says on your identification, that's really what you're propelled to.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, then I remember Daniel and I talking about this, that you don't, when you're in a senior leadership position, a lot of times there's no policy in place until you're forced to put a policy in place for something that was never really in your frame of reference for good, bad, or indifferent, whatever, however you want to look at it. And I'm curious to know, after that conversation with human resources, how long did it take between that conversation and things with a D&I committee to really gel and come together?
Well, it had been a year from me having that moment and coming out. It had been a year to when I was actually invited to the D&I community. And when when I spoke to Daniel at the time, it was still kind of getting its footing. But for myself, it really came to maybe bi-weekly meetings with human resources. And just, I know in hospitality, things take a little bit longer to come into fruition. But for myself, I was physically facing everyday struggles. And so every day it was not getting easier. And so it really was having conversations with my human resources team and hotel management team. And I think something that I learned from my conversation, and I was quite surprised about, was no one was ever saying no to me. No one was ever denying my existence or not saying that they wanted to include me, but that they were waiting. You're kind of waiting for someone to tell you these things. And so for a trans person who is just coming out and, asking for these spaces that my other colleagues readily have access to, like it all comes down to a human resources manager or someone in management saying, oh, well, if I knew, or if someone does need a uniform in another department, we'll provide that to them. I'm like, well, no, it should be provided from the start.
Right. Rather than putting the onus on the other person, the company needs to be proactive about that.
Exactly. And it's all down to really problems with disclosure. And that goes between colleagues and guests. And when I talk about disclosure, I mean, even to this day in the hotel, we automatically go towards gendered pronouns and gendered language for all of our guests. So it's not even a colleague perspective at that point. It's even from a guest perspective. And basically just waiting for that guest to disclose their own pronouns and disclose how they like to be addressed, instead of from the get-go asking them or asking everyone.
You're right. And that actually, that was a pretty eye-opening conversation you and I had as we were setting up this whole interview today. Even just, I think it's so easy to get, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole yet, because I have some other questions about this, but I think it's so easy to just to sort of get in your head about not knowing how to address somebody, especially if you've been with a company like Fairmont forever. You've just been sort of indoctrinated into how to address people, right? That's just, you've sort of pounded into your head for years and years. And it's literally just as easy as asking somebody how they like to be addressed.
That's so easy.
So easy, right?
It's so easy. And there are some things that really just slip up, like common sayings like, hey guys, things like that, or like, hey ladies, good morning ladies. But really it's just a learning opportunity, and we're all here to grow.
And the point about putting the onus back on the employee is, I mean, to draw maybe a similar phrase, you try so hard in luxury hospitality not to put any onus back on the guest, right? You try to think of as much as you can so that you're not forcing them to have to ask for something, whatever it is. It's a very similar concept. You're just flipping it, and you're taking care of your internal guests, air quote internal guests, right? In a different way. Your point about human resources waiting for someone to educate them or to help with the process of moving the ball down the field in this discussion is a really interesting one. And I think about what that must have been like. I mean, I know what it's like when I was working for a company and I went to a department like human resources asking for something, and it just felt like the wheels would grind to a halt. And it could be something like very still like I need a form for something, right? And it takes 2 weeks to get, or keys, whatever, a new name tag, whatever it is. But that's very different than having to educate an entire department on a whole new way of interacting with employees that probably would seem from the outset to somebody who's not really deep in it, that a lot of the discussion might seem to go against company policy or company practices. Like, so you sort of end up in this place where you're like, I want to do the right thing, but I don't want to get in trouble for doing the wrong thing. So I'm not going to do anything. And you just sort of sit there, right?
And you hesitate. Yeah.
You hesitate. So, it's maybe speaking to somebody who is in a similar situation right now where they're either waiting, they've had this conversation, they're waiting for the company to take action, or like maybe they are worried about coming forward because they don't know whether the company is going to take it seriously. How did you approach that next step in the conversation with the hotel, just to get the ball rolling?
Right. Well, you're meaning from when I came out to everyone?
Yeah.
So basically when I did express my identity to my management team, it was well received. There was no issues with moving forward or beginning conversations. I think it was definitely self-led. They were definitely reliant on my active participation. And that is something that it was challenging. I am still quite privileged. And so to begin these conversations for people who are not as privileged as myself was something that I took on. And it was quite trying at times. But, individuals in human resources, they are very open and understanding. And I think definitely coming with a housekeeping list of items that I needed, definitely got the ball rolling. And it was very easy to compare it to, things that my other colleagues already have. Right. But essentially, everyone was quite open, and I just needed to be that force to kind of ask for time.
Right. I imagine that it would put another level of pressure on, or if you have to go in as the person asking for change and then having to educate the people on the change you want to see, could be a heavy burden, and might prevent people from actually coming forward in the first place.
Right. And a lot of the time this is on another little layer, but a lot of the time trans experiences are heavily regarded and used for optics a lot of the time. And not a lot of the time are we compensated for providing that insight.
Interesting. You're almost acting as a consultant, and maybe you should be compensated as like kind of for time and expertise, right, and giving direction, rather than just give me your opinion. What should we do? And okay, go back to, all right. Yeah. Lunch break's over. Go back to work.
Yeah. Go back to the front line.
Yeah. So where are things now with the hotel and the D&I committee? You've been at it now for a little while. How are things lining up?
Yeah, I've been at it for almost over a year now, since I spoke with Daniel. But basically where it all started with the actual D&I, my involvement in the D&I committee was with providing educational seminars to internal management across the NCA region. And it was something that wasn't done previously, but something Daniel was quite excited about, because previously they'd never had active involvement from someone who the topic directly was associated with.
Right.
And so that was pretty rewarding and eye-opening on a lot of levels, because I got to touch a lot of people from higher management in different hotels within Fairmont. And after providing some sessions there, was able to get in touch with iSpa.
Oh yeah.
Provided some consults for them, and worked with Daniel actually on a article for Pulse, which is their magazine.
Interesting. Yeah.
So I'm sure I'll provide you with the link to that.
Oh, please do. Yeah.
Yes.
If it's online, I'd love to include it in the
It
show
is.
notes for people to see.
Yeah, it's a wonderful article just about how to provide an inclusive spa.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, work particularly for myself, and that it would affect like other trans people who eventually will be hopefully working in my hotel.
Mm-hmm.
Started quite slowly from everything from change room to uniform. And now we are looking at our language as a whole hotel.
Mm-hmm.
So breaking those barriers where we're automatically assuming the gender of people who are coming in,
Mm-hmm.
to asking them straight from reservation to check-in, what are your pronouns?
Oh, okay. Okay.
Straight to the point.
Right.
Yeah.
And why not? Like, why wouldn't you?
It's not offensive. It's readily available.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So practically speaking, if there's anybody listening right now who is unsure, who may be having these discussions in their own hotel and is a little unsure of how to deal with, you brought up the change room issue, uniform issue. I mean, I can't think of any name tags that have gender call outs on them. We don't really do Mr., Mrs., Miss, anything like that on them. Just first name, last name. But perhaps the uniform piece. How did that all come together? What does it look like today at the hotel for an employee coming or a colleague coming in?
So for a colleague coming in, we're still my great human resources team are still working on rewriting every onboarding document to include other gender markers, or instead of having legal name and preferred name or used name. So that's really great, because for any future colleagues, they can have that opportunity. And it was something with our human resource team in regard to uniforms, is having each department select an all gender uniform. And I love that word all gender, because it is so inclusive, whereas gender neutral is a little limiting. And something that so they are providing all gender uniforms for every single department, that if someone does come on and doesn't identify as either male or female, they're able to actually have a uniform that they're comfortable in.
Is it a different uniform from the male and female uniform?
It's a completely different uniform.
Okay. Okay.
And with the change rooms, it's still in works. I think what's difficult is, from my perspective at least, we can't expect every spa and hotel in the world to remove all gender markers or gender areas and go through all of this construction and put through so much capital to do that. Really, it's creating accommodating spaces. So for right now, we have 2 little vestibules, which are all gender change room and washrooms. So for anyone coming in, they have lockers right in the washroom that they can store all their belongings. And then hopefully down the road in a couple of years, we'll be able to invest that capital and fully renovate, so that we have all gender change rooms where people can just go into separate vestibules to change and lock their items.
Right. How do you feel about the progress so far? Being on the committee, sort of being in a position to drive that conversation, but probably also seeing what goes on the back end. Where do you think things are at right now?
I feel pretty positive. It's been, like I said, it has been challenging to kind of take it on as, again, one of 2 trans people in the entire NCA region. I feel very positive because we have been finding it difficult with, companies like Forbes and their standards not really aligning with being inclusive of gender. And something that specifically in my hotel, it's been months of conversations Well, I mean, years of conversations, but eventually we're get to a place where we are able to ask those great questions
Mhm.
and inform ourselves of our guests' gender or pronouns. And hopefully there will be a time when Forbes will catch up. But for now, it seems that at least our hotel and Fairmont is actually going to be working to kind of be leaders in that area.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, you bring up the Forbes thing. I lived and breathed Forbes 5-star standards like for a lot of my career. I know them a little better than I would like to. So I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about. It even brings to mind like there's hotel companies out there that have mission statements like "Ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen." You know,
Right.
there's a lot of stuff that is probably at one time seemed very
Mhm.
innocuous, but today
Right.
requires a lot more thought and
Mhm.
and deliberate action against. And so
Right.
yeah, hmm, yeah, I imagine. I mean, I'm just thinking about all the opportunities out there that I've come across, just even since, being involved in conversations like the one we're having today, the one I had with Daniel. I mean, there's it's great to see that there's progress, but again, there's a lot of room left to
Mhm.
go.
Right. Exactly. And even with companies like that ladies and gentlemen one,
Mhm. Not
it's
not
just
calling anybody out.
no, not naming any names,
Right.
but it's just obviously, again, it's frustrating because if there was a trans person present there, that would obviously be changed. But again, it's kind of companies either lack of education or just hesitation. Like I said, I think it's a lot of hesitation to change.
Mhm. How is the D&I discussion at the hotel framed with the colleagues? Is it more guest centric or is it more employee centric?
It's definitely more guest centric. I think the focus is definitely on guests. Um, in our D&I community, almost mm, I'm trying to think. I think it's just myself and one other colleague, actually. So it's a lot of upper management on the committee itself. So a lot of it doesn't trickle right down to the colleagues themselves.
Mhm.
But it has been great because they are able to provide this platform of education, which is really key to enact change and creating change in even processes like our email signatures, adding
Mhm.
pronouns to those.
Mhm.
So it's items like that which are really great, but it really does focus on guest perspective, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And your point earlier about human resources taking the time to work through not just forms, but just the general operation of onboarding a new employee is a
Mhm.
really good one. I mean, from a hotel perspective, I understand the propensity to think of everything from a guest first perspective.
Right.
Uh, but it seems to me like coming at it from making sure that everybody internally has what they need
Mhm.
to feel included and that they have everything to do their job and all of those other things that you talk about on an employee opinion survey or employee engagement survey or whatever it's
Right.
called now under the Accor brand. uh, those are the things that will always translate better into the guest service space. If you take care of the people
Exactly.
that work for you, the guests are always better taken care of. So
Mhm.
it seems to me like almost the perspective should be flipped.
Right. It's really a challenge because colleagues, they care so much, and so if
Mhm.
they had this knowledge and had this education and felt the support, that maybe they would be that able to take care of gender diverse, at least guests
Right.
arriving in the hotel.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, so we talked about onboarding, some of the change room uh, things that the hotel is doing, uniforms, asking guests how they, what are their pronouns or how do they prefer to be addressed. What else should people in frontline service positions know about, and even, maybe those in human resources or in positions to have these conversations in their own hotels or their own companies? What else do we need to have an eye on here?
I think, well, back to pronouns, I think language is really key, and kind of removing bias. That's something that is huge. Is everyday interactions with people is just strife with bias. If I'm seeing an email come in, I'm gendering that name. If I'm seeing a guest walk up, I'm gendering that person dependent on how they look. And it's what's really lacking is moving away from this thought of the binary, male and female, and using they them pronouns when you're unsure of the person's pronouns. Or in the spa industry, at least, it's really hard because people do have preferences for who their therapist is, but trying to remove gendered preference. And not so much remove it completely, but maybe to ask, do you have a preference in therapist instead of, do you have a preference in male or female provider? Because what if I want to work as a provider? What if I get trained as a provider? I'm not really going to have an opportunity within that language. I think language is really the key because, like I said before, it doesn't require capital. It can be changed.
That's an interesting thought. I mean, how do you, and this is maybe a thought experiment, and I'm sure something you definitely thought about before, but when, especially in a place like the spa that is so personal, when you're like, there's not a lot of other people that you would ever get dressed in front of and let them, touch your entire body, but it's a very personal experience, and people are going to have, and therapists too, like massage therapists, like are going to have a very, I imagine comfort boundaries are going to be very well established. And I'd be curious to know, just from your perspective, how do you, it's not necessarily about pushing those boundaries, is it? It's more about, like, I'll give you a scenario. If a guest called and the guest said they have a preference of a male or female therapist, and one wasn't available, a therapist who didn't, and maybe I'm getting way too like what if, and I apologize if I am, but like it could be a real scenario. If a male or female therapist wasn't available, but someone who didn't identify as male or female was available, how would you handle that? How would a spa, because that could be a very real situation that comes up.
It really could be. And I think in using myself, like if I had trained to become a therapist, I've always wanted to be an esthetician. I love nails. If there was a guest who did have a preference, say for a female provider, and we had asked, do you have a preference in provider? They said, oh, we have a preference in female provider. We don't have a female provider available, but we do have Kírs available. They're great. Yeah, I would recommend this person because of this. I think it's really just changing the conversation to focus less on gender and make it more on customizing the experience.
I love that you said that.
Yeah, I think that's something that we talked about in the early stages of this call as well, is just how frustrating it is from my perspective, because a lot of the time people who, have issues with what I'm doing or with being more gender inclusive in their language say that I'm putting too much onus on gender, when it's actually the opposite. I'm actually trying to alleviate a lot of gender difficulty or language.
Yeah, I love that you said that. It's about the experience. It's about what the person's going to get by, going to the spa or what, staying in the
Right.
hotel, going to the restaurant, whatever it is. And it's getting out of that very sort of narrow view of who's providing the experience that guest is purchasing.
Right.
Because we sell experience in hotels. That's
and everyone's capable. We're world class.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Yeah, your hotel's unbelievable. Everything that we talked about today, and me having a pretty good sense that there are a lot of people in a lot of hotels that are maybe a little bit further down the road in these conversations than your hotel is at, and far more that haven't even started yet. What's the message that you want to get out there to the people that are listening right now? And you've probably got a few different audiences listening right now. Those that are in position to enact the change, those are in position to ignite the change. Some people resisting, other people pushing really hard. What do you want to say to them?
Basically, what I want to say is trans people exist, non-binary people exist. And just the fact that if people are more open to having these conversations and more open to learning and failing, a lot of the time failing, and receiving criticism and using that to grow, then really we're moving forward, we're moving in the right direction. And I think eliminating a lot of that fear that people have to have these conversations and even begin asking questions of this nature, I think is really key for finding the future of hospitality. Because the trans experience is challenging, but also very wonderful and rewarding and freeing. And I think that it's a huge group of people that not a lot of hotels or areas of hospitality can really capitalize on or provide experiences to, because I think our practices and our understandings are a little bit more limited. And I think starting your own conversations within either an organized D&I committee at your hotel or industry, or just amongst yourselves as colleagues, to see how you can really provide these beautiful experiences to all guests, I think is really powerful.
I think that's really well said. For those people that are afraid to have these conversations because they are worried about saying the wrong thing or inadvertently offending somebody, what's your advice to them?
This is coming from a white perspective as well. Like I definitely, there are conversations that I have all the time and it's uncomfortable. And, it really is something that I've been struggling with as well. But really having safe spaces and being more confident to make mistakes. For myself, being misgendered, it really is difficult to hear, but as long as you apologize and try harder next time, that is really all I want. That's really all I ask. And I think a lot of people feel that way. It's there's less onus or responsibility on getting things right every single time. And really making mistakes is the only way that you can grow. And
just make an effort.
Yeah, make an effort. Try a little harder.
Kírs, this was such a great conversation. Thank you so much for being on here.
Thank you for having me.
Anybody wants to get a hold of you or learn more, or if there's a consulting opportunity that comes forward, somebody wants to do some training, what's a good place for them to go? How can people learn more about you?
People can find me on Instagram. I'm a very big Instagrammer.
Okay.
I'm a millennial, so love Instagram. My handle is at Kírs Arthur. So that's Kirs Arthur with a U. And all my links are in there. And I'll send you that Pulse article as well.
Oh, do that, please. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I'll link to the article in the show notes and your profile as well. So if anybody wants to do a little more research or get a hold of you, they'll be able to find it all there.
Awesome.
Good stuff. Well, hey, Kírs, thanks again for being on the show. This is fantastic.
Thank you so much. I love having these conversations. Yeah.